Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy, I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series intended to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversation with other writers. Tara Caimi is a certified trauma-informed creative life purpose coach and an author specializing in memoir and personal essay. She has a dual bachelor's degree in journalism and psychology and a master's of fine arts in creative writing. Her stories and essays have appeared in The Writer's Chronicle, Fire and Knives Quarterly, The MacGuffin, Pithead Chapel, American Writers Review, and other journals, anthologies, and magazines. Tara has also served as script developer for several award-winning animated short films. Her memoir, Mush, From Sled Dogs to Celiac, The Scenic Detour of My Life, published by Plainview Press in 2015, reflects her journey of self-discovery, physical illness, and healing. She is currently at work on a hybrid sequel about healing from complex trauma. And this is my conversation with Tara. Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
Right. I all I know to say is good. Like there's just too much.
What are you working on now? And what motivated the project or projects?
The answer to that question is I'm not sure. I have a project. I'm just not exactly sure what it is yet. The thing that motivated it was my own journey. So I have all of these journals that I have written over the past few years. I've gotten to the point where I write like a journal a month. And it may have been, there might have been a time in my life where I was writing even more than like a full on, these are big like journals. And so I have like 33, 34 of these things. And that like just talk about my journey over the past few years. And just to be vulnerably honest, what happened was a horrific, catastrophic event that I witnessed 3.5 years ago that just sort of exploded my world and turned everything upside down and inside out and made me come to a reckoning of where I was in life and what I was doing with my life and where I had to go from there. And so that's when I started journaling. That's when I just like I've got to figure this thing out. I'm not going to continue the way that I'm living right now. And those journals tell this story of my emotional healing journey. And I think I said in my bio that Mush, my first book, was the story of physical healing. And I didn't realize what was happening, but what, as it turns out, this thing that I'm working on, whatever it may end up being, is the sequel that tells the story of the journey of my emotional healing. And so what came up for me, this, which I could not have predicted throughout the process of self-exploration and discovery and deep dive inner work, was songwriting. I just suddenly, it was prompted by something that I watched, was watch a TED Talk where a woman was like, she wanted to write songs, but she didn't know anything about music. And she was working with a songwriter, and the songwriter was like, well, I don't know anything about music either, but she's like, do you have something to say? And that's when it hit me that I knew, like, I have a lot to say. I don't have a voice. My voice had gotten so quiet in the world, and I wasn't sharing, I wasn't using it. And I'm like, I'm going to explore this genre and see, how it works. And it was just like magical. So songwriting showed up for me, and everything I wrote in my journals, my handwritten journals. So my next piece, and then and then how you and I met through theater, and I started community theater. I just started like self-exploring, like who am I? Like what did I it was sort of like a journey to grow back down again, just to find out like what comes naturally to me. Who am I by nature as a person? Like we get so confused, in society based on convention and who we think we're supposed to be. And so I just really wanted to find that like sort of raw, like who is this person? And so I just started playing. I just started doing theater. I was songwriting. I was singing. And I ended up writing a piece from my journals that included some of my songs that was a one woman theater piece that I workshopped in the Central PA Theater and Dance Fest, not this past year, but the year before. So that was called Me, the evolution of a voice. And something along those lines is coming. Like it's part book, but I'm envisioning spoken word book to showcase the power of voice that is also theatrical and has a playlist, right? So I don't know. And I think I answered the second part of your question about how that came about. Did I cover that? Did you have any follow-up questions around that?
If you're comfortable sharing, what was the catastrophic thing that you witnessed that was the catalyst for all of this?
It was a hate crime. I'm just now, I think, Andy, coming out of the PTSD that I had, which is why I'm in the situation I'm in now that you and I have talked a bit briefly about. And what that does, so I have spent the past 3.5 years deep diving into what trauma is and what, it does to the body. But what that did for me was exploded a lifetime of some things that I had just been had in suppression, been in denial of, or not processed throughout my whole life. And that's how trauma works. For some reason, it can explode like other issues in your life that you don't even know are there or are not in recognition or acknowledgement of. And so that's what happened for me, and that's what set me on this journey. And I have been just doing this epic healing work over these few years. But what I find so fascinating in all of this is the power of the creative process to help you heal. It's unbelievable to me. And I mean, I'm living it, like I'm living it. And so this is what I want to do in my life coaching work. I want to help people basically, heal, come into their power of their voice through the creative process. The people who didn't even know that they had an inner artist living in them because they were in denial of it all their lives. So yeah, that is I get emotional, and that's okay. You can publish me being emotional. I'm fine with that. That's my work, to be vulnerable and share my story through art, because art is such a powerful way to reach people at an emotional level. It's a powerful way for us to connect with our inner world, to connect with our sensory systems and our feelings and our emotions in general, and to bring up and out what we don't know is hiding in there, right? So yeah, so that's been my journey over these years. And there is a lot of creative work in there. I mean, and another thing that happens when we are on the healing journey, believe it or not, is like we can have just these creative explosions. And I think part of that is because the creative process is so good at helping us access our subconscious and even our unconscious to some level, right? So the work is there. I have, like I said, like 33, 34 journals that the book is in there. I just have to find it, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's what it is with so many other writers too, is you just generate so much and so often, at least when you can, that you have to find the project once you started writing. And in some ways, that's the best way, I think, to go about it, because that doesn't sort of pigeonhole you or make you freeze up in the same way that creating a pre-dedicated project and say, okay, I'm only going to write stuff for this. I'm only going to write content that looks like this, can almost sort of kind of burn you out, can stall you out. And it can make that process, that creative process, so much more challenging. And then you just end up, hitting your head against the wall and hating the whole thing. And when you're in this process of just, I'm going to write whatever comes, then
Hmm.
it's a lot more freeing. It's a lot more valuable. And like you said, you get to deal with some of your own issues that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like, there are so many ways you can approach writing, and I think, like, for me, like with Mush, that was my first book, and I let it come organically to some extent. I'm a very, very story driven writer. I almost say that I'm like story driven to a fault. I mean, I just like that's just I dream, I think in dream and story. That's just my life. In fact, the reason I write nonfiction is because I don't have to write fiction. Things just happen in my life as if it's an unfolding story, or that's just how I see it. And some of the stuff I swear I couldn't even make up. And so I think I would be like abandoning my truth if I were to, not use this genre or what's been presented to me. But it was kind of like I just let that story unfold in that way. I started writing it thinking I was just writing a book of essays, and then suddenly this narrative arc just started to happen and it just flowed that way. And so I think that was right for that particular book. A lot of people might start with like an outline, and I think that's great. I have not been successful at doing it that way. Maybe if it's a different kind of a project, I could see like how that could work. But I fully agree with you in that depending on how you're approaching it, how it can really very much shut you down. Like after Mush published, I did not want to write anymore. Like I did a year, I said I'd give myself a year's worth of trying to publicize it as much as I could, say yes to every event that I was invited to and, all that sort of stuff. And boy, after that year, I wanted nothing to do with writing another book. And it was depressing, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of us have that. I forget, I think there's a term for it, but it's like maybe you know it, like post book depression, like postpartum. It's just like you birth this thing and then you're just like, it's not what you think. It doesn't end up being the experience that you think it's going to be. And so, like, I didn't want to write on the computer. Yuck. I don't want to sit at, facing a computer screen, like typing my words out. I mean, like, because you can get lost in it, you can like start writing in the morning and then suddenly it's dark and you're like, where did my day go? Right? I know you've experienced this. Really, what brought me back to writing was writing by hand in my journals with my recycled, textured paper and, just making it an embodied experience, and that took the pressure off of having to be perfect, and I don't worry about anything being published, and I don't think my writing in my journal is any worse than my writing anywhere else. It's just that I don't put that extra pressure on top of me when I'm doing it by hand in my journal. So that's where my next story lies.
That's wonderful. And that does happen. Sometimes the computer can feel like this cold, unfeeling thing. And it can be daunting. And what no one really talks about when you've published your book and you've done all the submission for that, then there's the marketing. And that requires a lot of peopling. And that can be exhausting. And then by the end of it, you've got no steam left in the tank to do more writing.
I got a little bit, I don't know if the jaded might not be the right word, but I would go to these writing conferences and sit on and in the audience on these with these panels of literary agents and editors. And it got to the point where what they were saying, I knew I wasn't going to do. I just knew I'm not going to go online and try to find a gazillion followers. I'm like, I was at a panel one time where I kid you not, and I don't know if it was an agent or an editor. I think it was actually an editor who said that she would rather work with an author who had like 20,000 followers as opposed to being like the best writer in the world. And I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm finished. And so, as I'm talking about my next book, I'm not even thinking about getting this thing formally published. I might produce it. Like, I don't know exactly what it's going to be. I hope I have a bunch of collaborators. I mean, It's on hold until I can find funding to do it, but I have ideas of what I would want if, if I get there.
I completely understand. The landscape of the publishing world has changed quite a bit over the years. And there's, with such an emphasis on the bottom line, it can be difficult to digest because you're trying to create a piece of art. And you know that most publishing companies, especially like journals and magazines, they're just hoping to break even. And even though that doesn't generate an income but for the author once you've published it, it's also a lot more satisfying to work with these smaller independent companies that do exist out there rather than something like a major publisher.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And I think that maybe you made that important point there in terms of finding one that's in alignment with what you want. First of all, you have to know what you want to get out of publishing your book in the first place. And again, that wasn't really taught to me in grad school. Like, what's your goal here? What do you want to get out of it? It's just like publish, publish, publish. So it is really important to find, if you're going with traditional publishing, to find that house that's going to be in alignment with your goals, what you want, what you need, and who you are as a person, I think.
So, what have you learned about yourself through writing?
I mean, the answer, this is not a lie, everything. Like, it is the way that I make meaning in the world. It is how I find out who I am. It's how I find out what I want. I'm so glad I journaled through this whole experience because I can now look back and see that the answers were there. They just weren't in my conscious awareness yet. They are on the page. And it's just like magic how that happens. I mean, you reveal things out of your subconscious through this process that you just never, and if you don't have the record of having written it down, you might not ever bring it into your conscious awareness. And so I have learned so much about myself through this process. And I think, especially with songwriting, because songwriting hits me even more at an emotional level through the vibrations and like everything else is using your voice that goes along with it, the poetry of it. That ends up being able to kind of bring out more of like not just what I don't know about myself, but also it almost is like predictive. It's almost like future telling. It's like I'll write a song and then months or a year later, I will understand what that song meant. Oh my gosh, because that came true in my life. So, and I've heard other people say the same thing. I didn't have that experience so much. And maybe it's because I write nonfiction. I mean, my songwriting is nonfiction as well, but it's just this sort of just that different genre. It just gives it like a different a purpose or feeling or something.
Texture. I think that having these layers of interactivity creates a stronger sense of purpose and meaning to it. And I think that's great.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love playing with different genres. Like I said, I started to write that one woman. I call it a musa tragicomedy. I've heard other people say traumedy. Oh, because I took a comedy writing workshop. I don't know if I shared this with you, but I took a comedy writing workshop through Happy Valley Improv, and I ended up doing my comedy set, my 5-minute showcase, for the final performance around my journey. It was very vulnerable and I almost didn't do it. Like I wasn't even going to perform because I'm scared of it. But in the end, I was like, you've been through this whole thing, just do it. This is what you're here for, to share your journey. This is part of your journey. So I did a whole comedy set around like, come to find out that a lot of like what I thought were just unique personality traits are very common trauma symptoms. So I've been playing around with writing in a bunch of different genres. I hope to do like traditional theater at some point, to do script writing. I've done script development for some short animated films. through my last job at Penn State. So that was cool too. So, but you're right, you get something, yeah, you get something different out of these like these different textured layers that you try. And I just love the cross pollination of all of it. It's really cool.
I think in your email to me, you said that if we signed up for the newsletter, we get access to that performance. Is that right?
Yeah, and but like full disclosure, I mean, it's a student showcase performance. You know, I've got my clipboard that I'm looking at the whole time and it's just like, but it's part of it is to show people imperfection is part of the process. Please embrace it, you know. That's a tough one. And I'm just getting out there and doing it is, you know, that's how you get there. So that this part to show the vulnerability of like, this is me. Like if I wasn't holding this clipboard, I would be shaking. You would see me visibly shaking up here, kind of a thing. But yes, access to my 5 minute student showcase.
After our conversation, I'm totally signing up for the newsletter. What's the role or responsibility of writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why write?
I think I might be a little sanctimonious about this. I think if we, you know, if we have our stories to share that can be helpful to other people, it's kind of a responsibility to do it. That's how I feel. And that's why I wrote Mush, because when I was diagnosed in this country, celiac disease wasn't even recognized. I mean, it was like I was in the hospital for 9 days, Andy, and they could not figure out what in the world was wrong with me. I flat out said to my doctor, and this is in my book, I said, you know, I wake up in the morning, I feel the best that I'm going to feel throughout the day. And then throughout the day, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm like, I know this doesn't make any sense, but I feel like my food is poisoning me. I said that to my doctor. And still, when they started testing me, they're like, we're going to start with this thing that there's no way you have. There's no way you have this because it's so rare, but we have to start with the thing that's most rare before we can work our way to the more common things. They put me on a gluten-free diet. Immediately, I showed improvement. Immediately. So in their mind back then, I was diagnosed in 2002, I want to say. And there was just no knowledge about this. And so my responsibility, I went to grad school to you know, for creative writing, and we had to write a book in one semester. We had to write a whole book. I was like, you know, you've been there. And I was like, well, what can I write about in this amount of time? And I'm like, well, you know what? I've got this story, and I want to be a person who helps to get the word out about this through art, right? Because again, like I think I said, you know, art, we can really hit people on a different level if we share through art. And it's sort of like education. It's like psychoeducation, or, you know, education through the creative process or through, you know, sharing. And so that's what it means to me. Like, I mean, this next book is going to talk about like how, you know, or showcase, right? So it's the show don't tell situation where, right, we want to share in scene and story and even metaphor and symbols, like all of this stuff is how I think to share and showcase how widespread like complex trauma is, because it's so common and accepted. And so these are the types of things that I feel like art is best equipped to help bring out into awareness.
Art, narrative, story, this is how we learn. And often it's sharing those experiences through story that we get a sense of a compass of, oh, this thing I experienced isn't actually my fault, or this was actually a thing that wasn't in my best interest. And it's not until we share those experiences and start talking about them that we can really understand that, you know, sometimes it's not us. Sometimes it's what we experienced. And that wasn't right. But now that's something that you have to deal with all of your life. The best way to deal with that is to come to understand it.
Totally. I totally agree. And I also feel like it's a way where we can come to understand that we're not alone in our experience, because it can feel very isolating. And when you sort of, something's not right, but you don't know what's not right. And so you have like this, you can't tell anyone because you don't know what to even share. And so you're walking around just feeling all alone in your experience. And we're not alone in our experience. Not one of us. I mean, the thing is, we're just not talking about it, right? So, like you said, yeah, just being able to share and get the conversation going. I mean, even just art can be just like a conversation starter, right? So maybe I write this book and take it out and we do like a little, sharing for hope and healing kind of a session. We open it up to discussion, like a talk back. Like I would love to do stuff like that. So I think it's just a great way. Well, I mean, it's authentic expression for one thing. And so I think once you are able to express like vulnerably and authentically, that's what fosters real connection.
The community connection is so important. People are communal. And in order to exist comfortably and in a healthy way, we have to make those connections. And that connection starts through conversation.
Right. And what better conversation starter than story sharing? Yeah.
So when you're struggling to write for whatever reason, what strategies do you use to get yourself back to the page?
I should not, maybe knock on wood when I say this, but I don't really struggle to write anymore. And maybe that's because I journal. Maybe that's because I journal by hand. So my process, I literally get up every morning and write something in my journal. I don't care what it is, but often it will lead to what it's supposed to be, and insights, and revelations and even epiphanies. And so I don't give myself the pressure anymore of thinking about the final product before I start. I just don't. I wrote a blog post that I just submitted for consideration on it as a guest blogger on a blog. And that didn't even intimidate me either, because that was going to be for a hopefully formal publication, but I just wasn't worried. I don't worry about it anymore. I've just learned that I'm not in control of the outcome, and I want to write. It feels good, and I want to share. It feels good. And so I can do my part, and my part is showing up to the page. I think in the past, I did struggle with that actually quite a bit. The blank page on the computer screen, I mean, so intimidating. And especially when you're like in school and you have to like do this stuff, or when you're really trying to get published, that's your goal. And so what worked for me in the past was I would just, again, it's still some form of taking the pressure off of yourself. I would write, if something came to me, even if it's just a title, or usually it would be in the form of like a first paragraph. I'd just write it out, and if nothing else came, I'd put it away. And so I'd have all these starts like of potential stuff, but I didn't know what. And then this happened with songwriting as well. And if I just wanted to write something but I didn't know what, I would go back to my folder of those like starts with paragraphs or titles or whatever and just read through them. And if anything struck me, then that's what I would work on.
It is so critical to take the pressure off in order to just be able to write. So having these little starts, making it part of your routine, especially when it's the first thing you do when you get up, because you're already doing stuff before you realize you're doing stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then you've accomplished a goal.
Yeah. Yep. I don't care if it's a grocery list. I mean, just write something.
Listing is another really useful exercise in writing.
And you can get those lists published now. They're called listicles, right?
What revision strategy or strategies do you find most useful when revising your own work, and why? What problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
My biggest one is to read it out loud. And this is pretty, I think, common advice, but not everyone knows. But for me, like I like to print. I like to print it out and have my pencil in hand and read it out loud. That's the best thing, in terms of once I feel like I have a polished piece. That's the last strategy that I use to find the little things that I want to change. before I send it off.
Reading aloud is amazing because you and definitely printing it off because being in a digital space, being on the computer, it kind of encourages you to read faster than you normally
Uh-huh.
would. And having that print off, you're going to read at a slower pace. So you're going to be more attuned to details and you're going to catch those misspellings or something like that, or tense issues a lot more easily than just looking at it on the screen. And I even did this when I was working on my thesis in my first book. I printed everything out and
Oh,
I
me too.
lined everything out. Yeah, I lined everything out on the floor. It was it was a landmine, to be honest, because the apartment was so small. And so you just sort of tiptoe everywhere and don't wear shoes. You just got to be in your socks. So that was one
I love that.
strategy that I used to. Printing it out, invaluable. I
I
caught
love.
so many mistakes that way, and I was able to organize the collection better as well. So even though it was a collection of poems, I'm still a narrative writer. I'm still telling a larger story. So it gave me an opportunity to see how each poem in the collection connected to each other.
I love that. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I didn't do that with Mush because it was, like I said, just a like your sort of your straight up like narrative. I didn't need to reorganize if it just came out that way, which is interesting. But yeah, for an essay collection or a collection of poetry or yeah, I can definitely see the benefits of that. And I feel like for me too, reading it aloud also allows you to sort of hear the rhythm of it and find those places where you just don't have quite the right word that you want there, you know. I mean, you do it just brings it into sort of a different level of awareness that helps you just to see it from a different perspective or hear it from a different perspective. I mean, it's just like I don't know. Do you I'd be curious to know if you have like a writing like a revision strategy that you use that like I can't think of a better one than printing and reading it aloud.
That is the one I use on every single piece, regardless of what I'm doing, regardless of what genre I'm working in, regardless of what the purpose of that piece is. I am always reading everything aloud. Hands down, that is for every single thing I do. It also helps to have an extra set of eyes. When my partner's available, I ask him, hey, can you look at this? And what revision suggestions do you have? Because he's a scholar. He's going to have a different take on it than maybe another creative writer. But I'm always open to workshopping with anybody who's ready to workshop a piece because that extra set of eyes is so invaluable, regardless of the kind of feedback you get, whether they've given you feedback that you can use in your draft or not. It's helpful to know how they're perceiving it, what they're seeing, because then if it missed the mark, then you got to go back and search the draft and say, okay, why did my reader miss this mark? What can I
Mhm.
do to make it clearer? So
Yep.
even if the feedback isn't something you can directly put into the piece, like change this word or move this line break or start here, that is still helpful.
That's a really good point, and it brought up a memory of when I was in the what I thought were the final stages for Mush. But with your first book, you never really know. Is that I hired an editor, and she was a published author. I mean, like well known and successful, published by a big house. And she was like running a writers group here in town, and said that just offered a really wonderful deal to edit someone's manuscript. And so I signed up, and the feedback I got made me feel like my book was just like trash. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was trying to go for a specific thing, which was what I called suggestive silence. Like I wanted to just, like almost like Hemingway, like the objective, like just tell the things that happened and let the reader have their own emotional experience. If you're telling it in the like showing it in the right way through scene, like they'll have the experience and it's their experience to have. And so this is what my piece that got published in the Writers Chronicle. It's called "Privileged Perspective in Memoir: Building the Bridge of Trust to trust the reader," or something along those lines. You have to have those long titles with the colons in them for yes, those publications. So I can't even remember my own title. But it just like that's what I was going for. And when I hired this particular person, who I'll be honest, she wrote sort of adult fairy tales. And I made the revisions. I added like I can't remember how many words, but more than 10,000 words I added to my manuscript based on her feedback. And then later, I just had a bunch of people read over the manuscripts that I trusted, like to edit for me. And the final one that I had do it was someone who I really aligned with. I was in a writer's group with her. She was freaking amazing. And she basically said, you don't need all this extra stuff. All you need to say is, what you said. Basically, just told me what I had done the first time, which she didn't even know. She hadn't read it. She, the version she read, she just told me to cut out all the extra stuff that I added because it wasn't necessary. So my point in this whole long story is that also a thing can happen where if you're not quite at a point where you're confident yet in what you're doing, how you're doing it, what you want to say, you can have the wrong people who are not going to align with your work, because not everyone will align with your work. This happened to me in grad school as well with a couple faculty members, and I ended up with the right mentor, thank goodness. But it's hard. How do you choose when you're so new? And so it's just like to sort of be careful and don't just go with that one opinion if it doesn't feel right to you at all. If it feels like it's not in alignment with your writing voice is the one that matters most. And some people will connect with it and some people don't. And yes, you're going to have to take some hard, all the criticism is hard to take no matter what. But it's just hard. But you'll know when there's a nugget in there after a couple of days of like, oh yeah, really, really, not wanting to believe that. But you'll know intuitively, just have a sense for, is this really changing my whole voice? Is that what they're asking me to do? And if that's the case, maybe they're just not the right reader for my work. Maybe my work just isn't in alignment with their style or their taste. And so that's just a tough thing. It's a tough thing. I guess it takes practice. That was a tough lesson for me. But in the end, I got the book that I wanted by finding the right person to edit it for me.
It is really important to find people that can pull back from their own sort of biasy or their own sort of lean to look at the piece that you're presenting to them and saying, okay, what is this piece trying to accomplish? And I think that's where my program in grad school really excelled, is saying, okay, it's not about what you're putting onto the piece. Step back a second and look at what the writer's trying to accomplish, regardless of genre, regardless of story, regardless of piece. What is the objective of this piece? What is this writer trying to accomplish? And then facilitating their path to getting there. Whether it's a piece you would write or not, because remember, this isn't your writing. This is somebody else's writing. You're trying to help them through their trouble spots, which are not the same as your trouble spots. So I think as reviewers, as peer reviewers, that's something that we need to keep in mind. What is the piece trying to accomplish? What is the author trying to accomplish with the piece, rather than foisting our own expectations on it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fully agreed.
What is your favorite part of the writing process and why?
My absolute favorite part is that it can give you insights that you just will not get any other way. And the epiphany moments, the aha moments, like it's the magic. It's the magic of it that I love. I have actually grown to like all the parts from first draft. I think in the past, my perfectionist was not cool with first drafts, which is why the blank page was so intimidating. And now, because I'm journaling by hand and having this beautiful embodied process with it, I love the first draft. I just love it. But I also love it when I get to call the perfectionist back from vacation and we're like, all right, now it's time to get to work, and then do that revision process. And especially when you're reading it out and you're doing like the final polish. And then when you get to that, and I would love to hear your experiences with this as well, because when you get to that point where you just know that's it, you just know it, you've got it, And it's just like, oh, that just feels so good.
I love the revision process. That is my favorite part too. So the initial draft construction, that's all great. I love the creation and building worlds and building characters and all of that. But then when I get to deal with the trouble spots and I actually work through them, right? Then I feel accomplished. Then I feel like, oh, this is something that is ready to go out into the world and I'm happy with it. And but it's really that task of working through the trouble spots because it's like a little puzzle. And to me, that is really engaging. That is one of my favorite things about the writing process is the revision process.
I agree. It's so cool. It's like, it is, it's creative problem solving. It's like, yeah, so, and you know your craft, and you're using this knowledge of craft to put this piece together in a way that you're gonna be so happy with. And that just brought me to sort of another like thought of like, I even love just reading other writers and thinking in those terms as well. Like, how in the world, when you read that sentence, like, how in the world did they? That's just amazing. So, yeah, that's a really good point.
What reading suggestions do you have? What authors do you keep in your back pocket?
My favorite book on craft, believe it or not, is Stephen King's On Writing. Is it? Yeah, yeah. I love it. I love that book. So craft wise, I would start there. I didn't think when I was in school that I thought I would write fiction. I never thought I would become a memoirist. Now I did have a journalism degree, so I was used to writing nonfiction, but I just didn't think that that would be my genre. And I chose it because, like I said, I had a story to tell that I wanted to share. And it was this whole adventure that I thought would make a really good story that I could write in 4 months, in one semester. But it stuck with me. It stuck with me, and so I read mostly memoir now. Sometimes I'll find really good fiction that I like, but for memoir, I would say Mary Carr is just like hands down my, go-to. And then there's a writer named Abigail Thomas who I also love. What I love about her work is kind of like what we were just talking about, like how she constructs her books is just baffling and fascinating, and I'm in awe of. She just writes these little vignettes, these little tiny poignant vignettes, and they're not in chronological order and seemingly all over the place, and it just comes together to form this just beautiful tapestry of a story. It's just like glorious. So I love her. Her essays, like Joan Didion, I mean, you can't sort of beat her. Joanne Beard is another one that I loved. Her book of essays, The Boys of My Youth, is like my favorite book of essays.
Thank you so much for that reading list. I can't wait to check everything out. And thank you so much for making time to hang out with me. I've learned so much.
Oh my gosh, this was so great. It was awesome talking with you. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.